mellow yellow. Yeah, the mellow yellow then was, you know, the enemy of the people.
The mellow yellow was the yellow police vans.
Phantsi Mellow Yellow was a song, like a revolutionary song. A literal translation would be like down with a mellow yellow. When we would see the Casper, then we would automatically go into like soldier mode.
And so when we saw the yellow police vans, we sing Phantsi mellow yellow.
Phantsi Mellow Yellow, Emma, Emma.
I remember a time in South Africa when we stood together for a better country. We took on the mighty apartheid government and we brought it down. Looking back at South Africa in the 1980s, there were things that felt so normal then, that now feel so bizarre.
And we are defying now.
Here's a young Mo Sheikh on a Durban beachfront protesting against beach apartheid in the 1989 Defiance campaign.
That's our slogan, free the beaches for all.
Here's a crowd of Cape Townians at an illegal gathering in Burg Street, Cape Town. They're being marked with purple ink so that the police can identify and arrest them later. And look, there's Trevor Manuel, a long way from delivering budget speeches, breaking his banning orders to attend a protest gathering where the crowd burnt effigies of P.W. Botha and Alan Hendrickse. At the time, I was a schoolgirl in Grassy Park, and not all of us were public figures, but we did play a role in the struggle. The first tricameral elections took place in 19. Black people had never had the vote before, and now there would be 3 houses of parliament, one for whites, one for coloureds, and one for Indians. We took a decision to boycott these elections, and we launched a massive Don't Vote campaign. My name is Charlene, and I was one of the many foot soldiers of this campaign. Here's a polling station in Mitchell's Plain on election day in 1984. The fact that there's hardly any people there is testimony to our campaign success. Nevertheless, the tricameral parliament was set up and follow-up elections were planned for 1989. And so the campaign to discredit this tricameral system continued throughout the 80s. But how did we do it? I remember it as a time of incredible energy, of dedication and of sacrifice, when ordinary people found a way to come together and take on the South African government. Perhaps, if we look back at that time, we can find a way to take on the issues that face us today. I decided to visit some of my comrades of the time, hoping that collectively we can piece the past together. I remember that behind the Don't Vote campaign was an organization called the United Democratic Front. The UDF was formed on the 20th of August in 1983, and it not only changed the face of the struggle, but it changed my whole life. I visited one of its Western Cape leaders, Mr. Joe Marks. Here's Mr. Marks at the time I knew him, defying his banning orders.
I'm restricted to my house. I'm defying the unjust restrictions tonight here because it is human and because it is my right to do so, so that we can have peace and friendship and a just government, a government for the people, by the people. I thank you. Bandla.
Onze UDF los, ik en leed Oscar en Petta, ons het bijgepraat, want hij was die president en hij was die vice-president. En Oscar zijn slagspreek bij mensen, vergeet wat Oscar gedaan heeft. Hij heeft me gezegd, no man, degree gomso, freedom now, freedom in my lifetime. Dit was die slagspreek wat mij baie ge-encourage het, die freedom in my lifetime. Ik moet die waarheid zeggen. Ik kon niet gedroom het, dat het ooit gebeur nie. Om toe begin te werken op die andere structuren wat nodig was. om hierdie gedagte wat ons gehad het, om United Non-Sexist Democratic South Africa te stig, om met eerst die organisaties op die grond bou. En dit was amazing geweest dat hoe vinnig die organisatie gestig was. Die structures wat ons opgezet het, ons twee, de families en die Gemmermanse families. Dit was een wonderlijke ding om te zien. Die unity, het was een wonderlijke ding. Elke eenheid het een rol gespeeld om die verandering wat ons vandaag het niet gekomen deur enige andere manier nie, maar deur die organs of people's power, soos hulle sê, hier in die Weskaap.
After the student boycotts of the 1980s, many of us went from student leaders to community leaders, taking up local issues that really paved the way for the beginning of the UDF. My old friend and leader at the time, Ibrahim Patel, remembers the early days of the UDF very well.
From my memory of it, the roots of the UDF itself was in particularly in the student struggle of 1980. Because with the boycott by about 100,000 students in Cape Town, the beginning of community organization was laid. Let's say 1983, the UDF was launched. And by that time, we knew already that a tricameral election would take place. And we saw the UDF as a public, visible way of bringing together many different separate struggles, unite them, and find a unity that is both political and local, that is both political and concrete. So the UDF got involved in civic struggles, and it became the basis of the formal opposition to the state's political initiative.
The UDF really brought people together, black, white, Muslim, Jew, rich and poor. I remember the Shapiro family, for example, being around from the very beginning. And Jonathan Shapiro was one of the most important people behind the UDF's inspired media.
Until UDF came along, I didn't feel like I had a political home at all. Then when this whole non-racial movement started, which it felt so different, and I went along to the launch at Rocklands, I remember, 20th of August, and it was a revelation to me. It was absolutely amazing. So I got involved pretty much immediately in the Claremont branch of the UDF. I was actually in the army at the time. Well, I had managed to get myself into this drawing office where I spent time learning how to be a cartoonist, and the other thing I used to try and do was to take as much equipment as I possibly could from this army office and use it for UDF and ECC things. And I started doing lots and lots of little cartoons and pamphlets and whatever we needed to put out, stickers. In fact, this one here is the first pamphlet I did for any UDF stuff, and it was really obviously trying to completely undercut and discredit the tricameral parliament. Alan Hendricks, showing him as a puppet of PW. It was actually banned for distribution.
By the time the UDF was launched, the date for the tricameral elections had already been set. The UDF committed itself to fighting these elections and the tricameral system as a whole, and it kicked off with a massive Don't Vote campaign.
Toen kom ons by 1984. Toen het ons die twee groot campaigns gehad, Asia Kailicha. We are not going to Kailicha. En die ander groot ding was mos geweest die zogenoemde clearling elections. Don't vote in apartheid elections. Dit het ons nou oral gevat in die Kaapse Skiereiland, hierdie area in particular, om mense te inform dat ons verwerp so-called colored representation in a 7 quarters parliament. Ek en my kinders gaan in die ronde met die loude hele wat ons gaan hier het. Don't vote in apartheid elections. Vote, don't vote. Moenie, nergens gaan jy by die huis.
What we were attempting to do was to discredit the tricameral parliament. We knew we couldn't stop a parliament from being set up. The state was too powerful for that. But we needed to rob it of any legitimacy. We understood that whilst our public call would be on people to shun the elections to the point where the tricameral parliament could not be created, the real measure of success was, if it was created, it needed to not have the support of large numbers of people. It was important for a number of reasons. It was important because we didn't want our communities in desperation at wanting houses and better health care and access to schooling to throw its lot in with the apartheid government. But secondly, we were also wanting to send a very clear signal to African communities that there was a unity of black people, that all those who were oppressed by apartheid were going to stand together to fight for freedom. So the UDF was about trying to create that unity, and the tricameral election was our first and perhaps our most significant litmus test.
As the campaign gained momentum, we young activists became more militant. The struggle had become more political, and it became a challenge to get older people, even parents, to support.
We were all young at the time, and it was a young person's revolt. There were older people with us, and part of our message was trying to bring activism to older people in the community and at the workplace. But it was at its heart, the energy that drove this movement was the energy of young people who wanted to change the world that they live in.
The Pandy family house at 50 Bats Road, Wynberg, was another base. My comrades Fatima and Yasmina Pandy and Kay Jaffa were all part of the Wynberg UDF.
I remember us saying, at rallies with our guns and our what do you call this, petrol bombs, we will liberate this country. So, we for us it wasn't just about doing the above board things, and that was considered by society as accepted to march or whatever, but we were also prepared to do more revolutionary things, because in essence, for me, as I said before, this was a war, and we understood it as such, as a war. And the war was not on some border or with someone you don't know. The war was with fellow South Africans, and the war was right here in our communities.
My comrades Mario and Desmond recall how difficult it was to get their parents' support.
You weren't just fighting the state. You were also having to deal with your parents. They'd grown up in a system where they were made to feel as second-class citizens. There was no vigor to actually challenge and fight. But as youth, you always are wanting to take on challenges. You wanted to take over the world. That was the sense you had then. You were willing to die for a cause.
Up until that time, people were very happy to take on local authorities and so on. But whether they were ready to take on the state, the might of the state directly, was another issue.
I think what happened with our parents is there was both a very high level of fear, and the state had demonstrated a powerful capacity to inflict damage on individuals and on communities. But also the sense of apartheid as a permanent system, as something that is so powerful that it will outlast all of us.
The state at the time had a machinery that would try to portray colored people as better off than African people, and that they would be aligned more to white people, and trying to counteract that was extremely difficult.
I remember we used the walls in our neighborhoods to win support. More than 20 years later, many of the messages we painted are still there. Pamphleteering was also a huge part of my life. There was a roster that ensured that we covered the whole of Cape Town systematically. We also used the community newspaper Grassroots as a way to get into people's homes and then debate about boycotting the election. By this time, my life and the lives of my comrades only appeared normal, but our entire lives revolved around the struggle. In my family and in my home, everything had taken on a political meaning. I arranged to meet my sisters and an old comrade Maurits in the home we grew up in.
I don't know when the homework ever got done, I must say. Because we used to come home, go to the centre in First Avenue, and then you do like whatever it is that you're going to do, if it's you're going to hand out pamphlets, or we're making a pamphlet, or having a meeting, and then you come home and you sleep, and you get up the next day, you go to school, and you just do it again.
We were at South Peninsula High, where we weren't encouraged to be active, and you went and you had SRC meetings and you had education awareness raising programs, and you got into trouble and you got detention or you got whatever, but you had to do what was expected of you in the struggle.
Ons het eintlik almal bymekaar gekom by Erika en daar het ons beplan hoe gaan ons mass action in die Western Cape wat plaasvind en van ons een van ons grootste bydrae was om basiese skole bymekaar te kry.
Well, the day would start off by first calling all students together and then working out a plan of action for the day. It wasn't your normal day where you would sit in the classroom and engage with normal schooling, but instead it was a day in which the students would come together and plan where the next student rally is and where we're going to gather as students.
Some mornings you would pamphleteer, other mornings you would do signatures, sometimes you would be picketing. And
oh yes.
Yes, yeah. So people, there were different things that people did in the mornings, usually in the evenings. Then what used to happen again on a Saturday, they would often let you get together and then you go work in maybe Elsie's River. And you would then go door to door. So you had different...
Or Maitland Garden Village. Or
yes. So there was always
odd area.
like the consistent, and you had to go sell grassroots and
full
grassroots, yes.
On a Friday.
On a Friday, full the grassroots, Saturday it get distributed. So there was always activities, and it was somehow or other very difficult to manage being a student or a working person with all of this. So you find that a lot of us that grew up in the 80s didn't have a life. Like myself and Fatima, Charlene, you yourself, lots of other people didn't grow up like normal youth in the discos. We had discos, but then it's to raise funds.
You would be spray painting on the walls, you would be putting posters up everywhere, you'd be 24/7, you'll be busy, agitating, ensuring that people don't vote and people don't go to work.
Yeah, it was very hard work. I mean, running up and down flights of stairs for hours on end, but you didn't actually do it and say, I don't want to do this, I want to go home. The people who didn't want to do it just weren't there. The people
you signed up voluntarily,
who wanted to do it was there, and we were enthusiastic about what we were doing. We were excited.
It shocks me today because I'm the parent of a teenager, and I think about where I'm letting her go and what I'm letting her do, and it's like a thing playing back in my head what I've done at that age, age 14, 13, 15. The things we were doing at night with other children our age, or people our age. Like the extent of that risk, I find that quite disturbing, and it didn't occur to me how unsafe it would be to sneak out of the house in the middle of the night to do illegal things.
Fighting and defeating the enemy became the only thing, and there was a focus on it to the exclusion of many other parts of human development, the building of relationships, the skills in dealing with our own issues.
Ibrahim's comments remind me of Oscar Mpeta's call to young people that there was no time for boyfriends and that we must dedicate our whole life to the struggle. In some ways, we did lead a one-sided existence, but in other ways, we learned so much. And somehow we found ourselves doing things we would never normally have done. The Jaffers of Ottery Road, Wynberg, were the epitome of respectability. Yet I remember Mrs. Jaffer stepping out of her comfort zone as she tried to mobilize her neighbors.
I never went out during my adult life without my headscarf. And also I had the title of Haji, having been to Mecca, so I needed to be very respectable and behave in a proper fashion. And I was personally criticized. People were saying they don't understand why I walk in the street on marches. It's not nice, you know. And I felt now, if you people who are criticizing me got up and went to walk in the street, then I could stay at home. And then you're not doing it. So this is what I have to do, go and march. I was always a very private person, and I found myself becoming somebody different, almost like a metamorphosis was taking place, and I think through my anger and my emotion, especially after my children were detained. As a mother, you know, it really affected me a great deal. And I would find myself running in the road after the cops and making a noise and doing things totally alien to my nature. And that also went for the other women around.
But my mother is probably one of the most retiring, modest women you can think of. Mm-hmm. And the idea that my mother could don a black, green and gold skirt, an ANC coloured scarf, and rap about women's issues and about the need to... It ended, I remember now, it ended with the call not to vote. But they became famous. They were in demand. They stood on the stage at the rallies of thousands of people and rapped my mother.
In our efforts to get every South African to take a stand against the apartheid government, we relied on religious leaders to get the message across. There was Alan Busak mobilizing the Christian community, and Imam Solomon's doing the same in the Muslim community. He understood that the times called for new ways of religious practice.
It is because, you know, of the vision that we had, you know, and also the determination, you know, right, to destroy apartheid, you know, destroy the tricameral parliament, that we just outperformed ourselves. And if we look back, for example, I'm wondering whether we'll be able to do those things again.
I think the message we had got from our community work was that there was going to be a very big rejection. So we were very confident that we had won the heart of our people to the vision that you can't do a quick dirty deal with the apartheid government and hope to have your problem solved.
Our people are staying away from the polls.
On election day itself, I mean, our primary task was literally election observers to try to, through our presence, discourage people from coming to vote. From the end of the election, the state knew it was an absolute failure. And they attempted gamely for a while to keep the pretense of a structure that had some degree of legitimacy, but it had been robbed of its legitimacy before its birth.
The people have rejected this tricameral parliament in total. And I think most of them came in with 25, 26 votes. I know the highest guy that got elected got 100 and some odd votes in a huge area.
The turnout at the polls actually made us realize that what we were doing was right. There was an extremely low turnout, but yet the puppets went to parliament.
After the failure of the tricameral election, the state resorted to very heavy repression If the election was in 1984, I think it would have been probably about 1985 when the state of emergency was declared.
In the years between the first tricameral election and the second, to be held in 1989, the situation in South Africa reached boiling point.
More than 1,000 people were arrested yesterday. We have said that we will show this government and the world that 4 years of a state of emergency and 4 years of the most unbelievable brutality and 4 years of detention without trial and restrictions of our leaders and imprisonment and detainees and all of that comes with it, 4 years of all of that could not break the back of the democratic movement, and neither could it break the spirit of our people.
Scores of young people joined the ANC's army, and on the street, police brutality was met with petrol bombs and stones. The ANC and SACP symbols were becoming more and more visible. All those in the film or their families were arrested or had to go on the run during this time.
I remember we were arrested, all of us. We were doing training with students in Scarborough with Marie Michelle and Sig Jaffa. And we had all these young students that we were now, doing sort of political education and then some other, just normal schooling and encouraging them to study and so on. And what happened was that they arrested all of us thinking that this was some kind of, ANC, MK cell kind of operation. Then it was a curry cup and they were really drunk. These people, I mean it. No. These policemen, they were all drunk, hitting hammers on the table and telling you they're going to eat it on your head next. And it was very terrifying, I must say. But at the same time, because they were so drunk and because it was a curry cup final, they just let us out, And that same night they came to look for us again at the house. And because they let us out, they realized that they made a mistake and then came looking from house to house for all the people that were at that thing. So that was the kind of chaos, in terms of how the security branch functioned. There was sometimes order to it and then sometimes absolute
no sense.
Yes, from an intelligence point of view, they didn't function in a very intelligent manner. But it was just brute,
Even for people who were even marginally involved, they would also be picked up. They were picked up.
Yes.
People were picked up by the scores.
Let's say myself, Fatima and Kay, we would go put up the posters. Now, Kay would be the driver and she would be parked far away, and she would also be the one that if, let's say, something happened to us, then at least one person knew, because in those days, you must remember, people went missing. So when you went together and did activities, you had to have some person that was watching if the police were coming on, and you would have people that would almost stand guard and make sure that, or if you did get arrested, that they would be the first to know, fine, it's registered, and that they can go and tell the family.
I remember, for example, getting arrested and then feeling so small in that moment when it's you and them. And people disappear for no reason. Even though I knew what I was doing was so irrelevant in the bigger scheme of things. People were plotting and planning bigger things. I was just a tiny pawn. But you knew that tiny pawns disappeared every day, all the time. It didn't matter who you were or what you had. So in that, it's just, you kind of just push through it and you do your duty. So, today, I find that in my whole life, I've taken no risks, pretty much, other than that. So that's so bizarre that you would go to the extreme and then play it safe in every other respect.
One had to change, one had to harden, and people were detained, people disappeared, people were put under house arrest.
This one was in the first emergency since '85, and this was Boerte's emergency legalized murder. I remember when we did some kind of guerrilla postering of this stuff, the late night stuff where you go around and and put it up on the walls. Boy, this one was scary because we knew that we would be in big trouble. And in fact, that we were chased through the streets of Tammerskloof by a cop van.
You just take a spray can, you look nicely dressed, you got a bag, lovely bag, handbag, with the spray can in. And so when the police stops you and you just walk away quickly from the site, and often they won't search you because you look so decent, and they somehow, I don't know, they have a perception that, struggle people always look untidy and scruffy, and so,
Green jackets. Some of them did.
We made the decision when with my children, the activists. We are not going into hiding. First, we're not going to do hiding for no PWXYZ. We're not going to do that. We dodge nobody. Because if we dodge, then we can't work. And if we can't work, then being a political activist means nothing. The first time I went to prison here, in the 85, whatever it was, police come in here, Shiva Kara and a van. Ik zeg, maar meneer, hoeveel mensen gaan jullie optellen? Ik zeg, nee, net voor jou.
Yes, the thing is, we had so many run-ins with the security police, and it was almost bi-weekly invasion, and there was a lot of support amongst the neighbors around. They were indignant about what was going on. And so on the first occasion when I set off the alarm, I think they came to fetch Mansoor, people came out in their pajamas and their dressing gown. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and I opened the door and said, come in, mentioned them by name, come in, and they've come to detain Mansoor. And the cops were becoming more and more uncomfortable because people are not supposed to know what they are doing. That's why they come in the dead of night. And so that was my speciality, in that I set off the alarm. As soon as I heard noise and I opened the window and off the alarm went, it blared very loudly throughout Wynberg, throughout Ottery Road.
I remember very clearly, like, my mother couldn't sleep here for, like, it was months, because my mother was so traumatized of being harassed all the time. Because if they weren't looking for Yasmina, who they later detained, they would come and look for me, or they would come and look for Rabia, or they come look for Thuraya, or they come look for Ashley, And they were so stupid that when they come for Ashley, then Yasmina's here, then they're only coming for Ashley, they have a order only for Ashley, so Yasmina's here, then they leave her. Then they come the next day for Yasmina.
Activists, and especially school children at the time, they were being assaulted and beaten up. Sometimes they disappeared without people knowing where they disappeared to. Parents used to come to the activists in the communities because they know that we were supposed to be resourceful and would have access to lawyers and so on. So basically what we started was a what we called a crisis line, where people could call when arrests were made, or where activists disappeared or children disappeared, or when they were assaulted and they needed medical assistance and so on. Those professionals included doctors, they included lawyers, they were psychiatrists or psychologists, a lot of advice office people. And what would happen is that when a call came in to the crisis center, a person who staffed that office would then call the appropriate professionals. They would call the lawyers, and then the lawyers would take the matter up further. If medical assistance was needed, we would call the doctors.
Ons het guidance gegee vir die mense. Ons het structure in plek gesit waar hulle kan lawyers kry en as die mense geskiet word langs die pad, dan phone hulle vir my en sê hulle, maar staan Max, had daar weer een van jou mense geskiet hier. My mense, ja, hy lê hier geskiet. En dan wat mense nie weet nie, dan sit ek die mense op my bakkie en reken Victoria Hospitaal toe.
We had arrangements in those hospitals with very sympathetic doctors that these guys would be seen in secret or anonymously. Basically what happened that I think there was a spontaneous feeling from many people to contribute whatever it is what they had in order to fight this vicious system.
The second or third time I was arrested was with a big group of people where we were all in a march down through town. And they were so huge, the group of people, that they divided us up into groups of 8 to process us at Caledon Square. And I was in a group, I was with my mom, we just happened to be put in a group with Bayers Nadir, Bay. It was the first time I'd met him. And we were all chatting and, going through this silly process that we had to go through at Caledon Square. And then they made us, they were fingerprinting everybody. So they put all this horrible black ink on your hands, that they do that stuff. And they didn't even give us anything to take the stuff off. They just sort of let you sink or swim during those things. So you're walking around with all this horrible stuff on your hands. And so, there was Bay, and he kind of goes like this with his hands full of ink, and my mom does like this. And then my mom kind of gets this little gleam in her eye, like she had quite a funny sense of humor. And she walked up to this big green board, like a green felt board where the police would stick all their notes and things. And she put her hands on this thing and she went, she left huge black marks down. And Bay kind of thought, this is a good idea. He went and he put his hands down. And then we all did. So he just completely smeared their board full of... I remember that my sister Yvonne, one of the things that she was quite instrumental in was to use her personal computer, which not everybody had back in 1983, to keep proper documentation of who was involved and, addresses, and it was a whole database. And the security police got wind of this, and when they detained her in 1985, they were very, very keen to get their grubby paws on the on her database. And of course, she wouldn't say anything, and she didn't tell them anything. And then they put her in solitary, and some of her comrades were trying to sing to her, and they welded a steel plate over the door so that she couldn't hear. She really took a lot of strain. But one of the things that was funny, and I drew later I drew her and her computer paper in the calendar poster that I did at the end of 1986, was that they thought that this little personal computer, and remember this is a full decade before the internet was even thought of, they thought that this little PC was linked to Lusaka and Moscow, which in those days would be sort of James Bond stuff. It was always that thing for me. I always felt the security police, in some ways, they knew everything and they knew nothing.
I think people feared lots of things, even if it wasn't real. They thought they could get killed and detained for all kinds of things, because I think people experienced the state as irrational.
We quite often went to show support for detainees who were on trial. And we used to go to Cape Town, and then they used to put the older people right in front with the mistaken idea that we would be respected and not harmed in any way, and everybody else would be behind us and they would be safe. But that didn't happen. They turned the dogs on the people, and some people got bitten. I was one of the fortunate ones who were never bitten or beaten for some reason. But these young, strong, white policemen, they showed no respect for the elderly. And that was actually a bad thing, bad for them. They were also being dehumanized.
And then you go to prison, then they open the door and they push you in, and Donner is a bliksemse etter. Donner is a bliksemse etter. I always thought it's my full name. Donner is a bliksemse etter. and they push you in, they lock the door behind you, then it's no more so romantic. You realize that you are in prison. And then it takes a little while for you to adjust to that. Days, weeks go by, and you adjust, you accept that.
Prison was just another platform to educate, like Lorna was explaining, and I think the senior, more seasoned comrades knew to use it like that. And it was also just another place to come out victorious. So even though they arrest you, you don't allow them to break your spirit.
Continues.
You fight back. So even when you're breaking inside, you don't let the Boers see you like that. You know, when they're coming in, when they're engaging their strength, and in the middle of the night there'd be this quiet 10 o'clock lockdown business that happens in prison. And that's when the protesting starts. That's when you start singing the freedom songs. They can't find it, they don't know who's singing. So they punish you, what can they do really? So it just became another site for the battle, pretty much. And because unless you're in solitary confinement, and I suppose even if you're in solitary confinement, I know lots of people kept up their fight even under those conditions. But certainly in a common cell, you would keep each other strong, and you would in the group, in the safety of numbers, you would continue to show your strength. Yeah, and I mean you make bonds that you don't lose. I don't know where to find anyone who I was in prison with, but there are days when those people are on your mind and you can visualize them, or you can imagine what they could be like now.
I mean, I could have died in the process. I mean, I could have lost my life in the process. But that just didn't go through my mind. It just didn't go through my mind, you see. I mean, it was that camaraderie, that confidence which we had in one another, you see. And yeah.
In those days, we took apartheid on from every side. Asia Khayelitsha in 1986, when we fought against the forced removals of our people to Khayelitsha, workers' rights, women's issues. We marched, we pamphleteered, we agitated against conscription, against gutter education, detention without trial. There were hunger strikes. Despite the UDF being under attack, with its leaders either in jail or being banned, and the organization itself being banned, despite state of emergencies and various forms of oppression, we fought another tricameral election in 1989.
1989. Oh, dat was een bitter periode voor die kinders van de UDF. Duizenden van ons opgesloten te versteren. Nie honderden, nie duizenden. Ons allemaal is in die tronk. Die elections is volgende week. Die boere pre-empt voor die elections, allemaal die ouens, voor die policeman mee gezegd, ons het jullie kakmakers maar toegelang. Wat ik goed afval, want toen ik in die tronk kom, zo weer achter die elections, vrouw hoor te gaan. Dus ik verbaasd om te horen wat hier gebeurt. Ja, die vuur het gebrand, elke pad. Die mensen het geprotest. Hulle wil regtige elections hê. Which culminated in 1990, the clerk saying that all the banned persons like me and others are unbanned. The organization are free to engage in free activities, which culminated in the elections in '94. Which culminated, that I say, in my lifetime, in the memory of Oscar Mpeta, freedom in my lifetime. It was indeed for me a privilege to have gone through those sufferings, pain, hardship.
It's an inspiring story, and it's a story that is often forgotten. Individuals like Nelson Mandela, I think, have played a very significant role in the evolution of the struggle for freedom, and there would be we have a very deep respect for them. But there's another part of the story. It's a story of ordinary, anonymous young people who took on the might of the state.
We all plodded on, you know. We didn't know what we are to expect at the other end. We also didn't think that we would necessarily see the change in our lifetimes, but we just proceeded. And I think that that is something we need people to understand. It was done for no personal gain, except for the goal of having change in the country for everybody's benefit.
Yeah.
It wasn't about personal gain, and in fact it was to one's detriment.
You know, what we can remember very clearly are people who got shot and killed and so on. What is less remembered are people who got broken in that period, who gave up their youths, their period when they should be finding themselves, and they put that on hold and tried to contribute to the freedom of their people. And many young people who went through that period, I think, today still carry the wounds.
When people say nothing has changed, perhaps the things that are so normal now, that we just accept as normal, you can go where you want to, you can join any organization, you can say what you want to, you can write, you can read, you can do all these things, are just normal. But the fact that we can say nothing has changed is indeed the great change.
With the unbanning of the ANC in 1992, the UDF was disbanded. Many of us now regret this, as it was the start of the demobilization of civil society. I'm very inspired by the recent emergence of the Proudly Manenberg campaign, where old comrades are drawing on their past experience.
Post the 1980s, organization has died. Slowly it has died, and I think that we are seeing now that organization is coming back to the fore. Activists of the 1980 period are starting to come together again and reintroducing what we did then.
Viva the people of Manenberg, viva! Forward with a campaign for safe communities, forward!
Proudly Manenberg was born out the activism of the 1980s. There's a rich history of activism in Manenberg going back to the 1970s with the 1976 riot. You had 13 people who were killed during that period, but that tradition of struggle and history took us through from the 1976 to the 1980s.
Because often in poverty, the biggest enemy is a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. And what we did during the struggle years was we had this monolith, this monster of the apartheid state with all its military hardware. But there were some things they could never take away from us, and our power to say no to certain things and the power to say yes to non-racialism and non-sexism. I think the big challenge now is to do what we did in those years, finding the right community vehicles, organization, whatever, for people to be able to take charge of their own lives.
Get the struggle idea back. It is a struggle.
There were many successful moments in the past as we fought against the mighty regime of apartheid. This reflection with comrades tells me that there's much to learn, and perhaps the greatest lesson is the power that we have in numbers. As a collective, if we pull together, I believe we can overcome our problems.